Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We're excited to have you all on the line today. It looks like we have nearly 100 people on the line, so that's a great turnout, and hopefully more will join us as we go along. So before we get into today's presentation, I just wanted to highlight that our three speakers today are Partner of the Year winners, and this is an annual award that Energy Star has. So if you're wondering how you might be able to speak on one of these Partner of the Year webinars, you do need to be a winner of one of these awards, and they are awarded to companies that have excellence in energy management and companies that leverage Energy Star tools and also have excellent internal and external communications, are active in our partner community, and have strong energy performance. And the applications for this year are now open, and they're due on December 7th, and you can find that information at energystar.gov/awards. So we look forward to seeing some new applicants this year, and for anyone who's interested in, has some interesting best practices that you'd like to share, you can note that in your application if you're interested in presenting on a future webinar. We'd love to hear from more of you. So I'd just like to provide a quick overview. Oh, I'm sorry, next slide. I just want to make sure I'm not the only one seeing the slides here. So we should be on the slide that's called today's webinar. Thanks, Rosemary, for helping with that.
Okay. There we go.
So today's webinar has been almost a year in the making. We're really excited about this topic about virtual energy management. About 6 months into the pandemic, by the time we got into last fall, we had heard from several LPs that they were successfully managing energy use remotely by not having to go to their clients' buildings, either because they could not physically travel there, or because the buildings were concerned about external people entering and were trying to implement safe procedures. So a lot of companies had to adopt, and it was something that not everyone was prepared for, but a lot of people adapted quickly, and that's something that our speakers will talk about today. And one thing that we found is that a lot of these practices that they implemented will be very helpful even after the pandemic wanes. So the technologies they used, we've selected speakers that can speak to more basic technologies, such as just video calls on phones, to, as Georgia Pacific will talk about, using very high-end technology of video goggles. So we hope that whatever your budget might be for energy management, that you'll pick up on some experiences and case studies today that will be applicable to your building. And these technologies that were used, not only were they helpful with doing remote energy assessments, they also have allowed for staff to be trained with experts not being able to come on site. And also they've allowed for more team members to be able to see issues in real time and to participate in problem solving where they might not always have been invited in the past to chime in. And finally, the speakers will be talking about a few different property types, offices and multifamily and industrial facilities. So if you're attending today and you mostly work with schools or another property type, for example, rest assured that our speakers can still answer your questions and give you some advice that will be applicable to your property type. So hopefully you can apply what you've learned here today. And I'll turn it back to Sam to introduce our speakers and get started.
Great, thanks. So next slide. We have three presenters that will be speaking to us today. First up, Jeff Stewart. Jeff is part of a technical services engineering team at Sustainable Investment Group. His responsibilities include managing the Energy Star Service and Product Provider Department and consulting on the engineering aspects of buildings seeking LEED certification. These include indoor air quality calculations and measurements, Energy Star labels, and retro commissioning services. Jeff has experience working on high-rise office buildings, individual tenant spaces, and schools. Then we'll hear from Matt Lindquist. He is a mechanical and computer engineer with more than 16 years of experience in building systems operations, commissioning, and recommissioning, and has been working with the RETEC Advisors team for many years. At RETEC, Matt designs and performs RETEC engineering services, including building assessments, recommissioning, commissioning, training, and building automation system replacements, as well as managing RETEC's engineering team. And then finally, we'll hear from Jeff Kaminsky, who has worked in the corporate engineering group at Georgia Pacific and its legacy companies for over 40 years. Over that time, he's primarily held leadership roles applying design tools like 3D CAD, laser scanning, and virtual reality for use on large projects. However, in recent years, now as a technology leader, he is extending that impact by helping the entire engineering department transform to more modern and agile business systems that produce superior results. So we welcome all three of them, and with that, I will turn it over to Jeff.
How's it going, everyone? I do apologize for my voice. Fortunately, I had a bit of a cold/flu symptoms come in, so I do apologize if I sound very raspy. But thank you for the introduction. We can go on to the next slide. Again, my name is Jeff Stewart. I am a recently promoted Associate Director of Energy for Existing Buildings and managing our Energy Star department as a member of Sustainable Investment Group. We can go to that next slide. Just want to do a brief overview of what Sustainable Investment Group offers, as we are a national green building consulting firm doing lead consulting, well consulting, Fitwel consulting, any kind of green building consulting you can think of, we do that, and along with our engineering services of energy modeling, commissioning, retro commissioning, Energy Star certification and benchmarking, energy audits, indoor air quality testing, and local law compliance. We have offices located across the country, and we do projects both domestic and international. So we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to kind of break down how we do our Energy Star walkthrough process. As everyone knows, there does need to be a required walkthrough to verify minimum indoor air quality standards are being met for any application that's submitted. Our process involved conducting a walkthrough of the eligible property on a sampling of floors and space types. We tried to do multiple floors, multiple different space types to see to get a good feel of how whatever building we were walking is operating. And we would take our sampling of indoor air quality measurements, not limited to the temperature, humidity, and light levels and fresh air volume serving those areas. We do take additional measurements as well, especially if we find a problem or a measurement value that's outside of the normal range, then we want to do further investigation while we're on site and talk to the property team and the building engineering team to see what is causing the unusual numbers, whether that's normal operation. If the tenant wants 80 degrees in their space, that is their choice, and we want to make sure that if we measure 80 degrees, that's what's supposed to be going on. But if we do find those measurements that are outside the ranges and further correction is required, we will follow up with the building team to ensure those issues are corrected before we would submit any application. Excuse me. Go to that next slide. Just as an example of a few buildings we've done as our pre-pandemic process, this is the Regions Plaza building located in Atlanta, Georgia. It is a high-rise Class A office building, and working with Stream Realty, doing a walkthrough of multiple floors, multiple space types to ensure that proper indoor air quality was being met. And we did find a couple of rooms where the temperature was slightly above the deadband that we were looking for, and with a little further investigation, the terminal unit serving those specific rooms just needed to be adjusted to make sure that the proper airflow was coming through. Once we confirmed with the building team that those were done, that we were able to submit the application, and they received their Energy Star label. We can move to the next slide. This is a property, Uncommon Fort Collins, located in Fort Collins, Colorado. It is a multifamily building owned by CA Ventures. It's mostly involved with student housing. And for this one, we went on site and took a sampling of measurements in multiple residential units where feasible, and then also with the leasing office and the amenity areas, including the common break rooms, some game rooms, lounge areas, and some study rooms that the property offered. So still doing our sampling approach to make sure that we're getting good coverage for different space types and the property to make sure indoor air quality was being met. And at this property, all our measurements were within normal ranges. So this property did earn their Energy Star label for 2020. I go to the next slide again. So once the pandemic hit, as I'm sure everyone is aware, that's where we had to start dealing with various challenges that were going on. So our process is we would always try to send someone on site, and with the pandemic going on, there were a lot of states and countries that were restricting travel in and out, so that added a different nuance to where we could not go ourselves. Then for properties where we could get on site, there would be much lower occupants. Either no one was in the building or just a skeleton crew of building management and engineering personnel, which, as I'm sure you've seen in the Energy Star guidelines and the updated guidance for COVID, that there does need to be some occupants on site in order for us to do proper indoor air quality measurements. So lower on-site occupants were an issue. Then those next two items, there were several buildings where ownership and management made the decision to not allow any third parties or outside parties to come on site during the pandemic as a way to kind of minimize any potential COVID spreading. And then on top of that, where third parties were allowed, many tenants were not allowing any non-tenant personnel to go into their space, which I know, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, some buildings still have those policies in place. And then there were also the issues to where if you wanted to go on site or travel to another state or out of the country, you had to provide a negative COVID test within a very small time frame, sometimes 48 hours or 72 hours, and then finding locations that could do, or finding an urgent care center or a doctor's location that could provide a COVID test within that 48 to 72 hour time frame was very problematic as well, just with the slow rollout of getting tests out to the various states. So there are many challenges that came through. If you go to the next slide. For what we had to do is come up with a modified approach to verifying that indoor air quality standards were still being met. So when it was not feasible for SIG to go on site, what we would do is ship our testing equipment directly to each property. We would then set up a video conference call via WebEx, GoToMeeting, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all the different video calls software that are out there, and we would walk through with the property team each piece of equipment that was sent and how to properly use it. So we would break down, like, this is how you would take the temperature measurements we want to see, what areas of the buildings we would normally want to see, and then once we go through all that, then we'd go through the testing forms that SIG put together, and we also went through a sampling form just to show, like, these are the kind of measurements we want to see. This is the style of notation we want to see to make sure we're covering all the bases and make sure that there shouldn't be any questions asked by the property teams. We would also, where feasible, set up video calls to where the chief engineer could share screens to where they could show the building automation system as a way for SIG to also put our eyes on the building automation and see what temperatures are going out from the air handling systems, what the chilled water and or condenser water systems were producing, any exhaust rates, things of that nature. So that was the preferred method, is if we could ship the equipment and then also share screens with the building automation system. It goes to the next slide. So, excuse me again. This is 999 Peachtree, another high-rise office building in Atlanta, Georgia, which is managed by Hines. We brought the testing equipment directly to the engineering team because Hines was not allowing any third parties to come into the building unless you are a tenant of the building. But we also did set up a video call where we went through the building automation system to verify that proper airflow, proper temperatures were being met, on top of the CO2, relative humidity, light levels, and such, that the engineering staff took measurements for in sending the forms back to us. I can say for this property in particular, we did have similar to Regents Plaza, we did have a few of the terminal units showing unusual temperature readings, and SIG asked for the engineering staff to take the physical measurements in those rooms as well to verify, is this an issue with the equipment, with the HVAC equipment itself, or is this a calibration issue of the sensor? And for all of these issues that we found, it was just a calibration of sensors. We talked to the team, and they worked with their controls vendor to get the sensors recalibrated. And once that was completed, they took measurements again and verified against the building automation system screen to show that the measurements were back within normal ranges. Excuse me. So we can go to the next slide. This is 75 State Street in Boston, Massachusetts. This is one where we were able to get on site during the pandemic, and we did have to get a negative COVID test within the 72-hour time frame just to get into the state of Massachusetts, and luckily we found some places that could deliver a 24-hour test result, so we made the decision to come on site for this property. We walked multiple floors, multiple space types. We were limited to a very specific floor list because several tenants didn't want anyone going into their space that was not part of their company, so we had to accommodate those requests, and as well as staying masked and wearing gloves the entire time we were walking the properties to make sure we were minimizing our risks of spreading anything to the building, as well as minimizing the risks of us catching anything. So if we can go to the next slide. This is 6195 Lusk in San Diego, California. Don't know how that typo got in there. But this is a property managed by Healthpeak with administrative offices, and we mailed our testing equipment directly to the site here. They did not have a building automation system that they could share a screen with, so during the walkthrough that the engineering team conducted, I was on the phone with them discussing the measurements they were taking and making sure that they were going through the right protocols, and we discussed how one of their rooftop units, no fresh air was being brought in, and while still on the call, they were able to diagnose that there was an issue with one of the fan belts that was causing no airflow to go through. So they got that fixed and then retook the measurements, and the proper airflow was satisfied there. Excuse me. So if we go to the next slide. So some of the challenges just even during this the remote walkthrough process, just with the nature of shipping, we did have a few cases where packages with our testing equipment was either lost or did not arrive at the proper address, and working with USPS, UPS, and FedEx to get those corrected where possible. We also ran into the issue where we conducted our video call ahead of time to go through how to use each piece of equipment, how to fill out the forms properly. But then when it came to the actual testing day, a different person conducted that walkthrough than we originally coordinated with. And there were times where the notations that they took were not adequate for what we were looking for. So we had to contact the building teams to ask them to retake measurements in certain areas to make sure that the proper documentation was accounted for. And then there were always the issues where they took the measurements and then sent back the testing forms and the equipment. And despite what we had discussed on the call, the forms they filled out showed measurements that were outside of acceptable ranges. So we contacted the property teams to try and diagnose what was going on with those specific areas. I know one property in particular, they took temperatures and said it was 68 degrees in all of their rooms, and that was fine. But when we asked them about what the normal temperature set points should be, they said usually 72 to 74. And so we talked to them to say, okay, you said it's 72 to 74, but we're getting 68 across the board for what you wrote down. That's not acceptable. We need to figure out why it's 68 degrees in each of these rooms. So we worked with that property team to rectify those issues. They retook the measurements, and things were good to go from there. We can get to the next slide. So we went through the challenges, but we did have some successes. So similarly to where they took measurements and found issues or measurements outside of normal ranges, a lot of these properties were able to diagnose some of their indoor air quality issues that were found during the testing process that they were not even aware of, that their tenants had not submitted work orders or things of that nature. So they said, like, well, one of our tenants, they had a lot of lights out, but they told us the tenants said they didn't want to bother the property team with work orders of the lights that need to be replaced. But that was one big thing they found, was being able to diagnose those indoor air quality issues. And then during these follow-up discussions that we had with the properties, a lot of the properties wanted to discuss energy efficiency measures that they saw that could be implemented, and we discussed with them about the feasibility of how to implement some of those findings. One of the biggest things was having a building automation system that they could remotely log into, especially when the property teams could not get on site, whether for a pandemic or for northern states, if there's 24 inches of snow and you physically can't get to the buildings. Having that building automation system to where you could remotely log in on your phone or on your home computer, that was a big thing that they saw as a benefit to implementing at their properties. So overall for this process, SIG, as our protocol, we want to get on site and conduct the walkthroughs if at all feasible as part of our services. It kind of helps to put two sets of eyes on the same object, where you can get two different perspectives of something. But if there are instances where it is not possible to get on site, we will still be offering this remote verification method as a way to help properties earn the ENERGY STAR label. And there's that next slide. And again, I apologize for my raspy voice, but thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think the plan is we'll have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation, but happy to answer any additional questions that might come up from this remote process. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it off to Matt.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm Matt Lindquist, and I work for RETEC Advisors. I'm principal engineer for RETEC Advisors. Go to the next slide, please. RETEC is a consulting company in the real estate space, and we live in an intersection of sustainability, technology, and buildings. We have decades of experience serving primarily the commercial building sector. And mostly what we do is design and implement innovative, practical, sustainable strategies to help our clients unlock value and fulfill their objectives. So next slide, please. And I am the principal engineer for RETEC. I'm a mechanical and computer engineer. I live in Minnesota, and I help our clients with their ESG programs, both leveraging CapEx improvements in existing building systems. So next slide, please. So what we encountered similar problems to what Jeff had, and I'm sure what other people had, is primarily a lot of our work is on-site work. We send engineers or consultants to buildings all around the world and work with our clients to implement programs. Come March of 2020, just like everybody else, there was a major holdup in doing those visits, and so we still had to meet our clients' needs, and so we designed a program which we call Engineer in a Box. The idea being that we can send this kit around the world, and have sent this kit around the world, to help get people virtually to the sites and look at things. I think we all acknowledge that getting on site is better than not being on site, but this sort of helped us bridge the gap at a time when travel was very challenging. We also found through this that there are some use cases that work really well, and some use cases that we will probably not use as much if travel is available. We also found that some of these things are things that we're going to incorporate into our normal operation moving forward. So the kit itself is this, at the base level, a cell phone, an IR camera, and some headphones. The idea being that we're going to essentially FaceTime with our clients at the space that they're in. It's really hard to move buildings around, so obviously we have to get there to be with them. We work with a designated property team member from the property and walk through and do the different things that we can do. A lot of people ask us, is this a service? And it's not, it's a toolkit. We use this to help do our other services. One of the major features and one of the things that we decided when we put our program together is that we really want to be able to share files and video and photos immediately. And so by sending our own technology there, it sort of helped cut through a lot of the technological issues. Essentially, the cell phone already has service. It's set to go. It's got all the apps that we need on it. It's been tested before it goes out there, and it allows us to just, run and gun as soon as it gets there. We'll have a short a Q&A session with somebody using the technology. Basically, here, connect to this meeting and go. Primarily, we use Teams as our platform. But depending on each client's needs, sometimes there would be other platforms such as WebEx or Zoom. Next slide, please. Obviously, why did we do this? Alternative for when travel is restricted or cost prohibitive, and that's probably one of the things moving forward. We've got a lot of clients. Some of them have small properties. Those properties still need assistance. They may not have a large energy spend, so it might not make sense to fly someone halfway across the country or around the world to go do it. But it allows us to still send essentially a virtual engineer out there and address their needs, particularly for smaller sites. And one of the things that we've often done in the past is have people send us a picture. Hey, send us a picture of that, and we'll talk about it on the phone. And, I think we all have acknowledged that pictures are great, and it's nice to be able to see a piece of equipment. Pictures, lovely. Video is better. So, can we capture some video of it, sending it over? Sending large video files really becomes a problem. Live video becomes transformative for us. Being able to direct the video and show us, can you show us how that's piped this way? Can you show us the sensor location? Can you show it in relationship to where the chiller is and the pumps are and the inlets and the outlets and those kinds of things from a commissioning perspective is very valuable. Being able to see it both in the infrared light spectrum and the visible light spectrum, so we can see if valves are opening or closing properly and steam traps are operating and such, so on and so forth. So that's some of the kind of things that were great. It applies to both small sites and large sites. It's done within conjunction of our other engineering services to do property support and commissioning support. We'll talk more about that as we move into some of the other sections, but commissioning is often kind of a sprint event where you go in and as a commissioning agent, you go to the site, whether it's local or remote, and you spend a day or a half day or a couple of days or a week or whatnot on site doing stuff, and then you walk away with a list that needs to get corrected. This has allowed us to sort of change that paradigm a little bit and better serve our projects. It's also allowed us to push more quickly with remote troubleshooting. So one of the site teams, some of our clients, they've asked that we basically station these devices at their facilities, particularly the more demanding facilities. And when they have problems, they can call us up right away and they can say, hey, what about this thing? We don't understand what's going on here. We think it's, maybe it's a damper that's leaking or it's a valve or the sequence isn't working properly. Combined with remote access to the building automation system, that really allows us to really understand and support these property teams in their push to reduce their energy consumption. Provides a direct line of communication. They know they can just basically pick up the phone and call us whenever they need to, and we'll answer and talk them through whatever issues they're having and take it right to wherever the problem is, which is one thing that's really helpful. Next slide, please. So the primary ways we use this are virtual walkthroughs, walking through a property, figuring out what's going on there, connection to site staff. I think face-to-face is always great when you're trying to work with site staff, but a video call allows us to actually connect with them. What we found is that, we have always had standing phone calls with site teams, but, they rarely want to join on video. If you actually send them a property or send them a device and tell them I'm going to FaceTime one-on-one with you, it's a lot less intimidating, and we get a chance to actually connect with people on a face-to-face basis, which is very helpful. BX9 is a program of ours. I'll talk a little bit more about what that is, and support of that implementation for the BX9 has been a big thing for us, and then obviously building commissioning support, and we'll talk kind of about that as we go along. So can we get the next slide, please? So virtual walkthrough, right? So, you know, as engineers, we support our clients from the diligence phase all the way through ongoing operations. And one of the key factors here is, can we get into the site and look to see what's going on at any given time to understand kind of what kind of a building is. A lot of the times we're working with ownership groups, and they get a list of properties and they say, hey, you know, we have this list of properties, tell me about those properties. And so we're tasked with helping the clients understand what their buildings are and how they work and how they can be improved or operated better. So this is a way to get us on site and do that. Basically, we call them up and we set up a time and we walk them through the site, and it's like a FaceTime meeting you might have with a friend on the street, and they're telling us all about their site and what's going on, and it's a great way to connect with the site team and start to build that relationship that's going to be critical to improving the facility as we move along. Fast reaction times, it's as fast as I can FedEx them in the box. So you want to have a virtual site visit with me tomorrow? Well, if I can overnight you the box, I will, and then we can connect. And that's something that we've done for quite a few of our clients, where we're kind of sending it out as needed and run through some things. We can send it out to, you know, companies where we're supporting their portfolio, and they might then ship it from site to site to site. So I might spend Monday with a site in Texas. They'll put it on a truck and then ship it to somewhere else, and I might be in New Orleans the day after that, and that's a thing that I couldn't normally do, but it allows us to really meet and connect with our sites. Some of the things that we learned is that it's good if we have someone who actually knows something about the site. There's a couple of instances where you know, someone will get an email in a box, and the email will say, hey, connect with this guy from RETEC and he'll help you out. And we connect with them, and they're like, well, I don't know anything about the building. I don't know anything about HVAC systems. They just told me to hold the phone. That is not as effective as having you know, a site engineer or some sort of supervisor or something who knows something about the facility. And obviously we're limited. This sounds really silly, but what you can actually see, you know, sometimes we've been asked, well, can you look at, you know, things, you know, other things in the facility, and we're like, no, I actually have to be able to see it. So some other nice to haves when we're doing this is site plans, so some sort of map of the facility so we can kind of walk through and follow along as they're walking through the facility. And remote access to the building automation system and equipment lists are also very helpful. Not necessarily have to haves, but definitely nice to haves. So next slide, please. So when we're connecting with site staff, you know, one of the things that you know, our model and the things that RETEC has had a lot of success with is connecting with site staff to get them excited and energized to do the recommendations that we recommend, but also for them to think a little bit differently about the way that they have run the facilities in the past. That is something that we have spent a lot of time developing relationships with, and this is something that we feel is critical in terms of getting the recommendations to stick. Obviously, we're a consulting group. We come in, we make recommendations, we help implement, but the site team will persist on, and we need them to buy into and fully trust any solution that we recommend so that they can maintain that system that way going forward. Otherwise, what we find is that the systems will sort of slip back into the mode of operation that they were in before. So this is this connection with the site team is very important In the past, it's always been because we went and visited with them. But EIB allows us to actually connect with them as you would with your relatives on FaceTime and say, hey, how's it going with you? What's going on in your building? Those kinds of connections, and it's very important. It's also a way for the site team to, because we do record these sessions, to show us the things that they're proud of and they're excited about. When they say, hey, I made a change and it made a big difference for the tenants, the clients, the customers, the residents, whoever it is in the facility, they can show us that. And then we can pass that along to their management team and say, hey, here's an example of something that this person's done really well. Let's harness this and share this as a learning point across your organization so that you can have other people make similarly good choices. It's also an opportunity to, when we're connecting with these site teams, for them to tell us about issues that they're having so that we can come up with solutions and, again, share those because it's recorded across the organization and say, here, this is an example of something that wasn't working, that we fixed it, and this is how it was done. It's more meaningful when it seems like it's a solution that the organization identified on their own than it is for just a consultant to come in and say, hey, you should fix that. It also means that any call can become a commissioning session. Essentially, we can talk with people and meet with people sort of on their own terms. And then identify solutions. So we can get the next slide. So BX9. So this is a service offering that we do. It's an optimization program. We have a set of control sequences, alarms, and alerts that we like and we recommend to our clients. We've been implementing for a long time that have been proven to save energy. One of the things that we do there is we log in remotely to building automation systems, and we sort of run through our programs. It's our analytics package, if you will. One of the big challenges we found is that, we give them a list, as many others do, of here are some issues that we have found that you may want to correct. Here's recommended solutions. And then the site team is left to implement those changes. And sometimes the site teams are very sophisticated and they're very able to implement these, and other times they look at our list and they're like, we don't really know how to implement this. So by combining our BX9 with an EIB, now we can help them implement the solutions. We can work with either the site team or with contractors to say, hey, this is exactly what we found. This is the problem. Once we show them exactly what the problem is, then they can work on a solution, and we can come back and use EIB to verify that it actually was working the way it was supposed to. This is helpful both for the site team, but also for management to understand that, yeah, we actually have fixed things and these things are better, and explain to them what the process is. It also provides training opportunities because they can go back and review the materials and say, this is the issue and this is what happens. So EIB enhances the BX9 process. So that's the situation with that. And then next slide, please. One of the big ones, and BX9 support and commissioning support and walkthroughs are all things that we will continue using this process for, but commissioning is probably one of the biggest ones for us that's become transformational. We were tasked with, at the beginning of the pandemic, and we were tasked with commissioning about a 350,000 square foot convention center in Las Vegas. We don't have any personnel in Las Vegas, but it's a client that we have a very long relationship with, and they were very excited to have us participate as part of the project team. So that was probably the biggest impetus for us to develop this program. And what it allowed us to do is to actually complete that project without actually ever setting foot on site. We have since set foot on site. I think we were there last month for the first time since before the pandemic, but it allowed us to pivot our program from the sort of the traditional, we're going to come out a certain number of times to test and retest and do some observations, to something that's entirely remote. The EIB was actually given to the controls contractor, and it was their head technician who was the one on the other end of our line, and then our commissioning engineer sat in the office, and he was the one who was basically looking at what was going on from our end. It allowed for functional performance testing in between, and sometimes, now we're using it in between and sometimes in lieu of site visits. So we've got 5 or 6 commissioning jobs where we have this as part of the program. But at the time, it was entirely in lieu of site visits. It also sort of allowed us to do just-in-time commissioning, essentially lowering the impact on the project schedule. What we were finding is, and what I think a lot of people find when you do commissioning, is that maybe the mechanical contractor, the controls contractor, maybe the factory startup guy, they're all on site together and they work for maybe a half day or whatever to get everything working and checked out, and then they call the commissioning agent. They say, okay, we're ready to go. So then what we do is we send somebody out, a few days, a week, maybe later, to go and verify the systems. By then, the factory startup guy is on some other job. The mechanical contractor is busy working on something else. And so all the people responsible are not necessarily there anymore. We find some issues, we send them back the action list with the issues identified. A week or two later, they may roll back onto site to go and correct the issues, and it really delays the startup. This allowed us to basically say, okay, well, we're going to do this factory startup. It's very low impact for us if for some reason they find a problem and they have to delay. But if they get everything done and they're all happy with the way it works out, we can basically log into the system, check out what's going on, visually observe everything from our office, and then if there's anything that they need to resolve, all the people. We're all trying to get everything done. So that's the kind of the plan there. Let's go to the next slide, if we could. So one of the things we're talking about here is that we use it in commissioning. So these are some of the things that we observed. Break it into smaller pieces. EIB was remotely verified that the commands were executed. Basically, we can look at it in BAS and look at it in the real world. And it allowed us to do what we think is a better job of commissioning and keep the projects moving on time. We have a little video of the EIB in the field, and we are running a little short on time. Do we know if the video will be available afterwards?
What we can do is try to get it posted to the website with the slides, if that works. I think that'll be the best solution, because I think it might not send via email, but yeah.
Yeah, let's see if we can post it to the slides and people can watch that on their own, and that way we can sort of make up a little time here. So EIB deployment, some of the things we found. So if we want to go to the next slide, and we'll pass by the video this time around. EIB deployment. We look for property maintenance team should be available. BAS service contractor, if they're available, that helps a lot. Engaged and responsive team is probably critical, and it allows us to quickly implement fixes and verify whether they're working. So this is success stories. If we want to go to the next slide, commissioning 315,000 square foot expo center. So these are some of the highlights here. But basically, this was the only way we were going to get this done because of pandemic restrictions that happened at the time that the project was moving forward. And it allowed for video documentation to show the owner and the project team that everything was working properly and to make sure that everything was identified correctly. You'll be able to look through these a little bit more later on. So I'm going to skip to the next one. We also used it for small commissioning work. So in this instance, there was one of our clients had 2 chillers that died and they needed to replace them. These are on one of the islands in Hawaii, and it became very hard to get to Hawaii during the pandemic. but we still wanted to make sure that the installation was done properly, because obviously once the installation is complete, there's really no opportunity to change it without significant cost. So this allowed us to connect with the site team and the construction team on a regular basis and identify issues that would otherwise have gone uncorrected. Things like piping issues, poor sensor location, access issues for maintenance. Those were all easily corrected by the contractor through this process, and so we feel like this allowed for a better installation with a pretty low effort on our part. Next slide, please. This is similar to Jeff talking about ENERGY STAR certification. One of our clients is 2,800 industrial and distribution warehouses. They wanted to find out if we could do some ENERGY STAR certifications. So we did perform some virtual walkthroughs. We sent additional sensors along with the traditional set that we'd normally send, and allowed for us to do our measurements and walk through and gather the data we needed to. It provided us video documentation as well as our traditional checklist that we might normally. And then one more slide. The last thing is, BX9 review. These are the kinds of things that we were looking for here. Leaking chilled water valves, hot water valves, steam valves, failed temperature sensors, non-functional dampers, sort of the whole normal host of things that we'd look for. And this allowed us to visually verify, and not just on the building automation system, that these things were working properly and that things were working the way they're supposed to. So I'm running a little behind, but obviously we'll answer some more questions towards the end. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff.
All right, we are pulling the video up. Going. All right, thank you to all our panelists. So we just have a couple slides to run through just to let our audience know about some upcoming webinars. This webinar was part of the Learn from the Best series. There are 2 left, one coming up on November 9th, dive into water and waste saving strategies from BOMA's W2 Challenge champions, and December 9th, working together to save energy, employee engagement strategies. And next slide. And then also coming up in the next couple of months, ooh, it looks like our slide is off the screen there, but the November 17th, there is part of the industrial webinar series, one on paper and petroleum, and December 9th, one specifying around bakeries. All right, and then finally, last slide here. So we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. We do have some questions that came in through the chat that we will run through. I encourage anyone who still has questions for any of the 3 presenters to type them into the chat, send them to the host. Whatever we can't get to in these next 10 minutes, we will follow up with you on later.